Ndio adui wa ujenzi wa taifa,
Jiepushe
na uvivu tujenge taifa.
ndugu yangu,
Kumekucha, amka twende shamba,
jiepushe
na uvivu.
As of November 2019, the KRA had raised $6.2 billion in terms of tax revenue. Now this year, their target stands at $16.8 billion. Now even with the reintroduction of turnover tax, thanks to the Finance Act of 2019, is this target still feasible in the first place? And if so, what will be the effect in terms of ease of doing business in the informal sector? Better still, is KRA anchoring its genetic fingerprint of an oppressor to the SMEs? Now this and much more, Kabri Nyona, an economist, will expound on this. Well, Kabrin, Kenya actually moved up from position 61 to position 56. That's according to the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index that was actually released recently. Are we actually seeing this ease in doing business trickling down to those in the informal sector thanks to reintroduction of TOT tax, or rather turnover tax?
So I think I agree with you that Kenya has improved in the rankings with trading with global partners. We can attest this with the Chinese and also other people who are investors who are coming into the country to do business. And I agree that they have it has enabled Kenya to rise in terms of the rankings. However, when you talk about now the presumptive tax and the turnover tax, which I'll give a basic meaning of a turnover tax.
True.
This is just 3% tax. This is 3% levy that is actually subjected to the gross sales that is payable monthly. The presumptive tax is deducted from the same. And so when you talk about these taxes being levied on this Juakali or the informal sector, then it's a detrimental effect because then the traders will not be able to carry out the business effectively, because then they're levied on the gross sales. It doesn't matter whether they've made profits, because at the end of the month you still have to pay. And I think this effect is detrimental. Like I said, it's negative and impacts the working environment is going to be compromised in that regard. And so yeah, I agree that it's not feasible enough.
And Kabrin, turnover tax is actually based on gross sales and not net profit. So it doesn't factor in if your business is making losses in the first place. From an economic standpoint, does this actually make sense even in the first place? Does it make logic in the first place? If you're actually trying to build the entrepreneurial culture and actually see Kenya move from an import-based economy, does it make sense taxing people on their gross sales rather than on their net profits?
So I will first agree that it's an illogical move. Why? Because the turnover tax is expected to be paid at the end of the month, and it's on the gross sales, not the profits. So that's the line that we have to understand, that it's not on the profits, rather it's on the sales.
True.
And so these are just entrepreneurs who are taking calculated risks, who are making self-sacrifices, and are not even sure of whether they're going to make these profits, and yet they still have to pay this particular kind of tax. So it's not a logical, it's not from a logical point of view, and even in terms of an economic perspective, then I think they did not put this into account, the effect that they will be putting on these self-made entrepreneurs with this informal sector, which is something that we should put into consideration in years to come.
Kabrin, it's worth to remember that 75% of the workforce is actually employed in the informal sector. What effect could this turnover tax that seems harsh to them have on employment ratings in the long term?
So to begin with, TOT is a regressive tax, and by this it means that if it's going to be imposed on the informal sector, then that means that these individuals who are in this sector already are going to come out of business, because the environment they're working on is unfavorable. The policies as well, as you can see, it's not a good working environment. And you will agree with me on that, because even the investors won't be investing in a business that has less profits, because what do we do business for? It is for profits. And so then unemployment rates are going to be high. And remember, it's something that you're trying as a country to cripple with, to try and get it out of the picture, because every year, every month we're talking about unemployment rates being high. So why not make a favorable environment? I just still believe that TOT should be scrapped.
Yeah.
So if you want to boost to boost employment, then why impose these taxes, heavy taxes, on already people who are sacrificing,
Yeah.
taking calculated risks to make profits and earn a living from the same?
Is turnover tax the ultimate solution for KRA to bring those in the informal sector to the tax net? And actually, better still, is it one of the conduits, actually the most surest one for KRA to realize its tax revenue targets this year?
So my answer is definitely a no. I think KRA this time have failed. They failed us. Why? Because even if they're trying to increase the tax bracket, then their aim should not be the informal sector, because these are the entrepreneurs who are taking sacrifices. Remember, the medium-sized people who are earning medium-sized incomes, and so maybe taxing them and imposing such taxes of them to them is detrimental. And I said it's a regressive tax, and so I think then it's a measure that KRA should not really base on, because COT, for some reason, even if they're trying to increase their revenue targets, then I think there are other avenues that they can focus on, and not just imposing these taxes on the Juakali sector and the informal sectors or even the SMEs, because I think then they'll be suppressing them, and people are going to go out of business. Yeah,
Alright.
and investments are definitely going to reduce in that regard.
The cost of policing and enforcing this turnover tax for those in the informal sector is actually argued as a road trip down a more costly measure than it will otherwise be for them just to be charged for their business permits, as it initially were. Do you agree with this?
Yes, I do totally agree. One, because of course the operational cost. This is a new tax, and now that's the problem with our government or people involved in this taxation bracket. They keep on introducing new taxes, but then the avenues of financing, that is policing and enforcement of these taxes, is something that should be taken into consideration. And so I think, as per now, with our debts that are hitting the ceiling, then I think we don't have those amounts of money or finances to really ensure that the taxation is being enforced. And also, how are we going to monitor and evaluate and make sure that these taxes are really meeting the objectives and the goals that were intended initially to be? So I think, as per now, I think then the policing and the enforcement costs are still going to be high, because we need technical operators, we need people on the ground to avoid this tax avoidance and tax evasion, which is a common thing that happens from one time to another. So yeah, that's my view on that.
All right. So
Yeah.
the KRA should be ready to actually fund this process even more.
Yeah, and the thing is, they might end up funding it more on collection and than even the revenues that they're getting.
Alright.
So it could be something that it gets back down to them, because now they're going to use more funds in enforcing rather than collection.
Perhaps chasing after the wind, we can
Yeah,
see that.
exactly. That's what I mean now.
Talking of a conduit of ensuring that there is youth employment in the country and also promotion of the informal sector, I would argue, as an economist and a business journalist, that those aged 25 years and below, remember these are fresh graduates, majority being unemployed, that those venturing in the informal sector should be exempted from turnover tax. Do you agree with this?
As an economist, my take will be, I totally agree with you on the same, because I believe that these youth who are below 25 years old, these are maybe fresh graduates who are maybe seeking employment, and we can't say that even the employment opportunities do exist in the first place.
True.
So if they're trying to venture into the informal sector, then I think they should be exempted. With that, then it will provide a good working environment. It will boost the economy, and the economic growth, I think, is going to be on a top notch with even other countries. And so provide these good policies and a working environment, business environment, supporting them. And one way of supporting them would be maybe to reduce the taxes, or maybe even to scrap them off and exempt them. So in that regard, then it's going to foster more people into this, and even investors even will have global partners who are seeing now informal sector as being an avenue for increasing growth and development in our country. And I think this is something that should be taken into account as soon as it can.
And also what to remember is that most of these freshly unemployed graduates are also facing capitation issues.
Yeah.
They don't actually have that capacity to finance this self-employment. But with the little that they have amassed, then they should have the best or rather the most favorable conditions to venture into that sector, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you, and that's only because if the government is willing to really take this stride, which I think it's going to favor these young unemployed, if they're able to really cut down on the cost, or rather just scrap off those taxes, then they're going to bring more people, and the issue of unemployment is going to be something that we cannot talk about anymore, because then we'll have dealt with it, because then we promote more of employment and an entrepreneurial culture among our youth, and avoiding negative things like crimes, and because people are immersed in productive means of production. So
now let's sum it up with this, Cabrin. It's actually worth to remember that as of November 2019, KRA had actually collected $6.2 billion in terms of tax revenue. Remember, this year 2020, their newly revised revenue target stands at $16.8 billion. Do you actually see this target still being a feasible one in the first place, or just a case of KRA's mass myopia?
In fact, I believe that's rocket science for KRA in the first place. I believe that they should find other avenues, for raising revenues for the government. At this point in time, we want to support the informal sector. Our broader aim, our long-term goal is to improve economic development and growth. And this can be done through informal sector, seen as a mainstream way of raising revenues, of improving economic development. And so I believe that then they should avoid being myopic and start looking at the long-term objectives and goals, making sure that they are in line with what even the informal sector, has to achieve or has to contribute to the economy of the country. Yeah.
All right. Otherwise, we'll see the informal sector growth fade in by the day, right?
Yes, it will fade. Yet then they had the potential to, contribute to economic growth
and actually steer it to greater heights.
Yes, I believe so.
All right.
Yeah.
So KRA, as much as they are dreaming, maybe
that
that's
is
a
rocket
daydream.
science, and I will repeat it. That is rocket science. It can't happen. It's next to impossible.
Alright, KRA's failure will be spectacular if efforts in bringing more parties into the tax net prove to be a chase after the wins. Richard Mwanja from the University of Nairobi.
Vivu ni adui mkubwa kwa ujenzi wa taifa.